Welcome back to the Garden Podcast, where we cultivate our faith one verse at a time. Now you see a little tree here and a little snake here. The garden represents the order that God wants to bring to his people even today. And the snake is going to represent the chaos monster that is trying to go against God's plan. You're going to hear these themes all over this podcast when we read our Bible and when we cultivate our faith one verse at a time. Thanks for watching. For joining in again, if you have a team or a worship team that you want to train on leadership, this is the video to watch. And I had a meeting with my students on worship team the other day, and this will be pulling from my notes that I actually learned from someone else, and I kind of turned it into my own format. So if you want to show this to a team, a leadership team that you're trying to build up, any kind of worship team that you're trying to build up, these are things I learned from someone else and kind of developed it into my own just format. If you want to watch this video by yourself, take your own notes and turn it into a different format for your leadership team, please do that. So, but if you have some kind of team to lead, this is the video to watch. Now, the team that I shared this with is our youth worship team. And basically, I kind of set a standard beforehand that our team needs to follow to basically join or stay on the worship team. Now, first and foremost, if that sounds too harsh for anybody, then if that's too much already for you to hear, there needs to be some sort of structure for your team. There are standards and rules in every part of life that we have, and if you have someone on your team that can't even stand to be corrected or live by a standard, then they're probably not going to fit. Okay, and I'll talk about that a little bit more because that's actually in here. The first thing that's most important is the person's relationship with God, but it's also the position of the heart. You want to find out why they're joining the team. Why do they, for youth, for example, why do they want to be on stage? What's the difference of them being on stage and on the floor? What's their motive for that? So to figure out the position of the heart, this is one of the first things I told my students. A friend of mine shared this with me. He said, you got to be willing to plunge toilets, first and foremost. That'll show you where your heart's at. If you're not willing to do the lowest job, then that'll kind of prove the position of your heart. When it comes to Jesus, he literally washed the feet of the disciples. And not only that, the one disciple, Judas, that he knew was going to betray him, he washed his feet too. So where's your heart at? Why do you really want to do this? So be willing to plunge toilets. I also told my team, be willing to meet new people. I'm the youth pastor, so sometimes somebody new will come in and end up not getting their name or anything. I have the students on my leadership team who will go meet the new kid or new person in church and just let me know. Let me know what their name is, and I can meet them at some point and just let them know about the youth group and stuff. So if you have a team, please get at least a couple of them that are a people person, okay? You need someone that's talkative. You need someone that will engage new people and engage people on the team and engage people in the youth group, okay? We have a very small youth group, so honestly, most of it is students who are going to be on the stage for worship. And so if you have a bigger team, then maybe some of them don't want to sing, some of them don't want to play an instrument, but just make them the engagement team. That'd actually be a really good name for it. Engaging new people and keeping people within the youth group engaged as well. My biggest component, my biggest standard is to be all in off the stage. Okay, your persona and your personality and your relationship with God doesn't change when you come in the doors, and it doesn't change, like the person you are is not going to change once you get up on stage. Okay, people are going to find out real quick if you're fake, all right, because they're going to see you go on the stage and talk one way, and then outside the church they're going to see you talk a different way. My biggest point with that is you are the church, okay? So you being a representative of the church, if you're living a double life in school, like I'm talking about students, if they're living a double life in school and the church building, the students are going to know that. So first and foremost, your relationship with God is most important. And if something's compromising that, you need to be willing to pull this person off your team and talk to them. And sometimes it's easier said than done. Like I said, we're a pretty small youth group. And so we sometimes on your team, you just kind of have to use who you got. And that sounds kind of bad, saying it just like that. I went ahead and set this meeting up with my students to make sure they are willing, to live by these standards. Because I'm not just going to let anybody on the stage. And any pastor shouldn't just let anybody on the stage, okay? We want to know the position of their heart. We want to know why. We want to know their intentions. And most of them are just excited they want to do it. If they're getting bad grades in school, we don't want to compromise that. If they're disrespectful to their parents, we don't want to compromise that. Okay, we don't want to compromise and there be a difference in who they are in youth group and who they are at home. I'm more worried about who they are outside the church building, because they're not going to be in youth group forever. Once they start, they're technically just in youth group for 4 or 5 years, depending on when your church starts them. You need to be all in. You need to have buy-in, okay? You can tell when someone is in it for themselves and when someone is in it for the bigger picture. You need people who are in it for the bigger picture. We as disciples of Christ need to be in it for God's will. Does God want to answer our personal prayers? Yes. And I heard a video today from Bible Nerd Ministries, and I can't remember her name, but I watch her channel. Maybe I'll tag her since I mentioned her. Bible Nerd Ministries. She talked about Romans 8:28. For I will work all things for your good, for the good of those who love God. People twist that verse into thinking that God is just going to bless every individual their own way, when really we need to look at the bigger picture. What does God need from us? He's not in it to just, she said in her video, we're not in it to just get stuff, to bring the cross to such a low level where Jesus didn't die on the cross for your stuff. He died on the cross for your salvation. And that's the point that Paul was trying to prove when he wrote Romans. He wasn't talking about mere material things, okay? Jesus didn't die on the cross so you could have a new car, more money, things like that. Does God want you to be blessed? Yes. But blessings can come even when there's suffering, okay? We need to be willing to just lay it all on the line in heart, soul, mind, and body, okay? The New Testament repeats that over and over and over again. Paul suffered for Christ, okay? He literally got stoned to death, came back to life, and went back into the very town of the people that stoned him. And then Jesus repeatedly ran off and literally crucified by the very ones he was dying for. So sometimes we need to be willing to suffer for the greater good, okay, for the bigger picture. So that's called buy-in, all right? You're not just in it for yourself, all right? And you'll find out really quick, somebody's motive, if they're in it for themselves or not, if they're constantly complaining, if they're constantly, just bringing up personal things, and just, it kind of seems like they're just out to get someone. That's someone that it's really hard to teach buy-in. It's really hard to teach heart. Actually, I heard somebody say, you can't teach heart. You can't teach compassion. That's something that the Holy Spirit needs to impress on someone. If they don't have it already, that's really hard to teach, because Jesus had compassion even while dying on the cross for the people that just hung him. You can't teach that. How many times in our lives, as our selfish desires, our sinful nature, sometimes that we revert back to, do we try to get revenge on people for so much less? And Jesus was willing to say, forgive them, for they know not what they're doing, while he was on the cross, because Jesus knew the bigger picture. So you need to have buy-in, heart, soul, mind, and body. I also tell the students, be a leader in school. Okay, if you're not a high schooler or junior high or whatever, be a leader in your job. Okay, be a leader in where you're at. All right? Do the best you can. Do everything with excellence. Okay? I've heard Ruslan say, he's got a podcast. He's a Christian rapper, and he's got his podcast that he does. He basically said Christians were the ones who were the leaders in artistic ability. Today, it seems like, I can't remember exactly what he said, but basically in churches today, like, they're so bland, when really a lot of churches would paint these artistic paintings on their ceilings, because not everybody had access to the Bible. And so instead of everyone reading it, they would come into the church and see the pictures and maybe explain it. So my point is, like, they did things with excellence. We need to do things with excellence today. I think we're seeing like a surge of Christians kind of coming out and taking the forefront on podcasts and on TikTok. There's a Christian side of TikTok that's actually really good, and we need to keep that up. As leaders in the culture, we need to stop allowing the culture to dictate what the church does. The church is supposed to affect and have impact and change on the culture, not the other way around. Now we see a lot of churches today who are adopting and affirming sinful acts, sinful morality, when really we need to come back to being the artistic leaders in our communities. Okay, so be a leader at your job. Get the best grades you possibly can. Okay, and I tell the students on my team, if they're just failing in school, then they need to step back from the team. Okay, because I don't want any distractions. Being on a worship team is not priority number one. Their relationship with God is priority number one, and also their grades in school. Okay, if they can learn how to handle responsibility at this age, then they need to be able to learn that for later on when they become an adult. Okay, being on the team isn't necessarily mean like you're more spiritual. It's not you're more important. Nothing like that. It's to teach responsibility and to follow these rules. And if you're just getting bad grades, then we need to help you out with that. I also tell my students, and if you are in church, please be in the altars every chance you get. They may give a call for salvation and you're like, well, I'm already saved. Go up there anyways. Pray with others. They say that, your anxiety can be cured when you're not serving yourself, because a huge part of anxiety is you're trying to fix your own problems. Anxiety is always about you. That's why you're more anxious, because you're thinking about yourself. The moment you start helping others and start reaching out and giving and simply just praying over all others in the altar, suddenly your mind is not on yourself. Okay, this is why speaking in tongues is great, because you're able to focus on the here and now. It's really hard to think about more than one thing at a time when you're speaking with God. And 1 Corinthians 14 talks about that, and I can't remember the other verse, but basically when you pray, you are literally praying the will of God when you speak in tongues. It might actually be 1 Corinthians 14 that's in there, but I know Paul talks about speaking in tongues is important, but he'd rather you prophesy and all that stuff. That's 1 Corinthians 14, but I'll look up the verse and maybe tag it right here later on. I have to remember to do that. So that could help with your anxiety, just to serve others. So if you want to be in leadership, be in the altar every single time. Okay, you don't necessarily have the luxury of just hiding in the back. And if you're a leader in the church, you need to be the one that's up front, willing to serve, willing to, and also get poured into. Okay, the altars are open to you as well. I told my students, seek out opportunities to lead devotionals. And what I mean by that is, they can take, ownership, lead a devotional if they want. But my main thing was, like, when we do Sunday school, be the first to answer a question. Be the first to share something with the group. Ask questions, because whatever question you have, the student next to you may have the same question. So don't be embarrassed to ask a question. Be a leader in Sunday school. Help out your teacher by being engaged, and take notes. Take notes, okay, in church. Ask your pastor questions, okay? But if you're asking him, something that he already said in his sermon and you could have wrote it down, it's not really his fault, okay? Or her fault, all right? His or her, your pastor. So basically my main point is take notes in church, be engaged in Sunday school, You are always under authority by someone. So if you have a pastor, you're under their authority. Okay, they are the shepherd of that church. Help them be engaged in their Sunday school class when they're teaching. Or if there's another teacher, raise your hand, ask them a question. They'd be more than happy to answer your questions. Okay. Also, this is for my team specifically, but if you're on a worship team specifically, or the youth team, if you're a leader in the youth team, but really when they do worship practice, I tell them to pray before and after. Maybe have just like a 60-second devotional time after to kind of give the vision of that night. Let them be on the same page, because really this is discipleship. Part of this is discipleship. We're building a team here and not just necessarily putting on a show. Okay, worship team is not putting on a show for people. It is literally ushering people into the corporate worship and unity to worship God. So pray before and after your teaching function, worship team, youth team, whatever team you're on, maybe even work. Okay, this doesn't just have to be church stuff. Also, here's one of my favorite points. Be fat. Now, I didn't make this up, but FAT, maybe I'll put it up here. FAT, okay? Be fat. Faithful, available, teachable. I actually had this in one of my earlier videos when we went to Belize. Faithful, available, and teachable. Be faithful to a congregation. Be faithful to your pastor. If you're not the pastor of the church, be faithful to your pastor. Be faithful to God. And find out what your pastor needs. I promise you there's something he needs help with. And be open to what that is. Okay, it may not be, the first couple of weeks may not be exactly something you want to do. But like I said in the beginning, be willing to plunge some toilets if somebody messed up the toilet. Okay, there was one time, gosh, how long ago was this? A year or two ago, where we had a staff meeting and the church hadn't been cleaned yet. I think it was a Tuesday night. And I knew, obviously, the next day was Wednesday. Well, I went and checked the bathroom, and let's just say it was messed up. Okay, it was trashy. The toilet was not in great condition, and I was like, you know what, the cleaning lady will get it. But I was like, no, it's Tuesday night. I don't think she's going to clean before tomorrow night. So the toilet was really nasty, but I went ahead and did it. I had to scrub it, and it was gross. But I took ownership of this bathroom because I don't want to, lead in a church where I could have helped a situation and I didn't, I want our facility to look nice. Okay, so I went ahead and cleaned it. I didn't wait for the cleaning lady because I think she had already cleaned at that point, and somehow the bathroom got messed up again. So just be willing to do that, okay? The bathroom is definitely not the job I would choose. That's for me personally, but I just went ahead and did it, okay? So I need you to be willing to do that. Be willing to be the servant of all people, all right? Like I said, being on the team doesn't make you more spiritual. It's not about being better than anyone else and being on a higher level, because the devil would love for you to take any kind of power that you can get and take advantage of it, or even take it for granted and rule that over people. Okay, we have the story of the talents and the story, a couple parables that Jesus shares, where each person, or actually more importantly, the parable about the guy who was forgiven a very large debt, and then he got forgiven. Then he had a servant under him who had a smaller debt, but he basically punished him for it. And so the king found out that the guy that was forgiven the large debt didn't forgive his own servant, so they took the guy that had the very large debt and put him in jail. Because as a leader, we need to, a part of that is being willing to forgive much because we were forgiven much. Okay? So you're not more important than anybody else. That's not what it's about. All right, this is another one of my favorites. Don't get caught up in the roller coaster. Basically, don't get caught up in the drama, gossip. And my question that you need to ask yourself, do people come to you for the tea? Okay, the talk. Do people always come to you to find out what the gossip is? If they do, that's a problem. So moving on from that, that's not a super complicated point. If you're gossiping, you shouldn't be on the team. If I found out, somebody on my team is gossiping, we don't talk about it, okay? Because we don't mess around with that. Gossip quickly turns into church hurt and church splits, and the devil just wants to steal. The enemy wants to steal, kill, and destroy. He wants to destroy any potentially good thing that can happen, and the way he does that is just splitting it right down the middle. And whenever a church starts to get a good thing going, sometimes people just argue because of a miscommunication or a gossip, and the church splits. That's not good. Next point is, be honest. Have a group chat, some kind of group chat with your team, and just let your leader know if you had a bad day. I like that point too. My friend shared that with me. He said on his youth worship team, he said that they let each other know when they had a bad day before practice. I want to give the opportunity to let the students know that they don't absolutely have to be on that stage if they just can't focus. If they had a bad day, it's okay. They don't have to do that. I kind of added this question in here when I took these notes. What would Jesus do if he were you? That's more of a question that, of course, is going to pertain to serving capacity. But that question also has to do with the type of person you are outside of your church building. Because like I said, you are the church. So I know back in the day, the bracelets used to say, what would Jesus do? But let's take it a step farther. What would he do if he were you? What would he do in your situation? So we want to be more like Christ. A couple last second points. It's not about a stage. This one's a little more practical. If you're on the worship team, smile, okay? Be in the moment. It's not about just giving a fake smile. But if you're worshiping, you gotta actually get into it. I've seen so many times where someone's up there just and they're being kind of complacent. They're not being intentional about hey, I'm in front of a lot of people. And sometimes that can be a very big distraction. It's not about putting on a show, but if you're not just able to get into worship, probably shouldn't put you in front of a bunch of people, okay? That's very practical. If you've ever been on a worship team, if you've ever been a pastor, it can be very distracting. If you have someone on your team that's just not into it, probably shouldn't keep putting them up there, okay? Like I said, it's not about putting on a show. It's not about being fake, but you know what I mean. If somebody's just a good worshiper, because a part of being on the stage is you're leading everybody to worship God. And if your face just says it all, you're just not interested, you're not being intentional, then that's not going to work. I kind of said this already, but a different way to put it, being on the team starts before you get to church. Then my last point is just be nice to each other. If you have a dispute, if you have something on your mind, somebody offended you on the team, try to meet with them. If you need to pull another leader, like for my students, if they need to ask me to be in the room while they talk to each other so I can kind of mediate, that's fine. But the unbiblical thing to do is to go behind their back and tell everybody else how mad you are at them instead of telling them to their face, because most likely it was a miscommunication. Most people aren't looking for arguments. And if you are, you don't belong in the team. If you're just looking to argue with people, you're not going to work well with the team. But most people aren't looking for arguments. Most people do want to serve. And they do want to do a good job, but sometimes they just need someone to push them in the right direction. But if they're just arguing, if they need me to mediate, I will help them talk it out. Because if that's one thing I learned was to address an issue before it becomes gossip, before it becomes a miscommunication. There's a reason the Bible says not to let the sun go down on your anger. That means don't wait forever. Okay, if you're mad at someone, you may have to wait till the next day. Okay, let your feelings be felt, and then collect your thoughts. Not text. Call. Try to meet with that person in person. If you can't, I'd rather you do a phone call than a text, because text is the quickest way to miscommunicate a point you're trying to make. But if you're offended, the other person may not even know it. You got to let them know. Okay, so be nice to each other. Be willing to work those things out. There's arguments that the disciples had when Jesus was walking this earth, and as perfect as Jesus is, his teammates were still arguing with each other. So sometimes even a perfect leader has to deal with those things, okay? There's going to be a point where your team is going to have some kind of miscommunication. You just need to be willing to like step in and help them facilitate that. Because like I said, it goes back to that bigger picture. So I hope this video helped. This is probably one of my longer videos, and let's share this video. Please like, comment, any questions you got, put it in the comments. Share this with your team members, anyone that could benefit from it. And I hope this helped. Thank you for joining us at the Garden Podcast, where we cultivate our faith one verse at a time. Thank you.